I mean, a lot of reasons. I mean, for one, kind of simple reason, they're cool and super fun. For any sort of audio nerd or synthesis nerd,
which we are.
which we definitely are. The particularly Eurorack marks a kind of interesting market from a like the barrier to entry is really low, which you see in the just completely insane number of people all making new and interesting modules in that market. So, you know, part of the reason was it was pretty easy for me to make a module and it was still a hobby, and get it done to the point where I could sell them. So like modular, very interesting, has a very low barrier to entry versus almost any other piece of hardware you can imagine. So there's two good reasons. It definitely allows for more people to try crazy things, if that makes sense, which is great. If you know, it took $500,000 to build a synthesizer, then, you know, and some, you know, do absolutely take that much to design and get constructing them. You become very conservative with new ideas. And you know, the absolute opposite is true in Eurorack. There are all sorts of ideas, awesome, horrible, like you see the full spread of just possible creativity of function, which is great because we get to try new things. We get to think about music in new ways, which I think is, I don't know, to me, that's definitely one of the big goals of why I'm doing this.
And honestly, no matter how weird the idea is, there's probably an audience for it. The audience may be small, but there's probably somebody out there that is like, yes, that is exactly what I'm looking for. If you buy a traditional fixed architecture synth, you buy it and it's got pretty much everything, every sound it's ever going to make is already in it. You might be able to configure some things and make it do a few different things, but it's all built. It's ready to go. You plug it in, it works. A modular synth, you purchase each individual component separately and design a synth that you want to the exact spec that you want. So you get the sound, you get a filter, you get every different component, you get different distortions, you get whatever you want to make it sound exactly the way that you want, and then you connect it all together with little cables. So, you know, somebody may want exactly that weird distortion that you just made, or they may want something that's more gentle, but, you know, you may want both of them. And then for a different day, you swap them out, because with a modular synth, you can change it as often as you want. And every time you change it, it's a completely different instrument. Generally quite collaborative. We're on great terms with a lot of different Eurorack manufacturers. And although we don't generally make collaborative products, we freely share ideas and generally work to support each other. I have no idea. And we're not being coy.
Yeah, no.
The last 3 years have just been so roller coaster that we honestly just don't know what the next few years are going to bring.
Yep. I mean, our sort of biggest goal for the business right now is to continue to diversify out of Eurorack, for a lot of reasons. I mean, for example, this year Eurorack is not doing well at all. Just there's, I mean, you know, overall consumer spending not great. Eurorack in particular is definitely seeing reduced levels of customer spending.
So I think the answer is more of the same, but different.
Yeah. And we started in this a while back, like we have our plugins, but we're definitely trying to get out into more ponds, just so we can be a little bit more diverse income streams, so we can be a little more stable. I mean, we've seen quite a few modular companies go under in some form or another in the last year, and that's, I mean, we're definitely feeling the sort of general pain of the industry right now. So we're definitely trying to figure out how we can be more independent of the whims of the Eurorack market.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that we do is just try to keep moving forward, thinking about what cool new products and what markets we can get into to continue to be able to pay the bills.
Yep. Yeah, work harder. That's how we deal with it pretty much.
And just to add on to what he just said, we have an absolutely incredible team. And one of the things that Stephen and I try very hard to do is protect them from a lot of the BS, right? Like, we don't want them freaking out. And we're not freaking out. We're not, in a state of panic or anything. But when Stephen says work more, generally, we try to take that on as much as possible and not make the team have to bear the brunt of that, because we really want this to be a place of balance and not a place where everybody's working 90 hours a week and miserable. So at that point, it was just the two of us. Well, at that point, it was really just Stephen doing this as a hobby. I was a biology professor getting tenure track offers, and I wasn't excited about them. And, I'd worked for a lot of years for bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD, postdoc, all of those years pursuing this education for this job that I thought I wanted. And it just wasn't what I wanted. And he saw it. He saw how unhappy I was looking at this. And so we just sat down with a spreadsheet and looked at mostly numbers and tried to take a realistic approach to the finances. And could we make a financial go of it based on what we had in savings, and what we thought we could sell? And so that was basically the risk assessment. There was a lot that we thought about too in terms of our own happiness, which is like, we were lucky if we got to have dinner together. And if we did, it was at 10 p.m. Like, we never saw each other. And, we got married because we liked each other. So we kind of wanted to see each other. So, that was in the pros column of doing this. And so we looked at the numbers and we thought we could make it work. Growing the company was not even on our minds at that point. It was just can we even make this happen and not starve?
I mean, in some sense, you need to grow when you can't get done what needs to get done, which is kind of how we ended up hiring our first employee. We asked them if they wanted to just test some modules.
And free beta test is
exactly.
pretty common in this industry because people are excited to do it.
Yep. And they were awesome at it. And we needed someone to do it. So they are employee number one.
We hired them part-time and realized that they were actually really good at a lot of things. And so now they're full-time. They went full-time pretty quickly after that. And we're like, let's make this happen. And they really wanted to be here full-time. And so they're still here. To your question of how do we know what we need. That's still a struggle. In part because we generally, like I said that my title is the doer of many things, but I like to say that we're all doers of many things here. And with a small company, that's generally the case. So everybody here wears a lot of hats. So sometimes it's hard to know what we really need because everybody does so many different things and we don't know who really needs help the most. So
and then how that might contribute to increasing sales so that we can actually pay for them. Like, it's very hard to make any real rational judgments about a lot of this stuff.
yeah. So we're still working on that one.
Yeah.
Top pro is probably the flexibility of being our own bosses and, just being able to make those choices. The top con is being the people that have to make those choices and having the responsibility. We take the responsibility to the team very, very, it means a lot to us that their livelihoods are depending on the choices that we make. And, their benefits, their retirement, their salary, all of that stuff is dependent on us making good choices.
I was going to say almost the same thing, but it was, you get to be in control, so you get to make the choices you want, but then when something goes wrong, it's always your fault. Which is coming from I was working at 200 plus person team where if something goes wrong, it's even it's not necessarily your fault. Like the things that block you every day, there's always sort of an externalization of problems, and that is just not true in a small company, particularly when you're the one making all the decisions that impact you. It is obviously great in that I'm getting there.
Are you?
Yeah, I am. Sorry. Loading. Like being able to, I'm just completely failing on talking today.
So everybody knows that there was a part shortage. That is largely easing at this point. And so a lot of people are actually so right now there's this weird point, almost inflection point in the industry where people still have shortages of certain parts and can't get them. But then a lot of us have too many of some things. And so we're just stuck with a ton of parts that we don't need or can't use or won't be able to use for the foreseeable future or whatever. And sometimes it's because we have these parts, but we need this part to make this product and we can't get it. So that's one of I think, the big things that people are kind of stuck on right now. One of the big status things that people outside of the industry, outside of the manufacturers don't really know is happening. People are getting flooded with parts at this point, and still stuck and not able to get others. What else?
I mean, decreased customer purchasing, and that's definitely across the music production industry, the music gear industry. Software, hardware, everybody's down this year pretty much. And so that's particularly after the rocky last couple of years, which were both like demand was huge, but then the supply chain problems and inflation and all of that stuff, we're still kind of spiraling out of that. And hopefully that'll just sort of continue to tame down over the next year. But it's still just definitely affecting us.
Yeah, it's been a weird time in the industry. I don't know how many years in a row we can say that. Have a contract manufacturer, and so they give us a quote on how much it's going to take to build. And over the course of the pandemic, we got requoted multiple times. We absorbed several of them because we didn't want to have to raise the prices on the customers. And then at some point, it was just so much that we had to raise prices pretty drastically. That wasn't ideal, but we weren't going to be able to stay afloat if we didn't do it. So we basically just take the quote that we get from the manufacturer and try to determine how we can make that work with, we look at what else is on the market, and then there's just, we try to price it based on that.
Yep. I mean, we're largely based off the manufacturing price. And we went a pretty standard split between the manufacturer, the stores, retail stores, and the distribution. And yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely happened where we've gotten the manufacturer price back for a completed module and been like, yeah, it's not going to sell in the market, so we just don't do it. It's happened a couple times in the last 3 years, which is frustrating, but it's hard to, particularly with the fluidity of manufacturing prices lately, it's really hard to predict until you're done what something's going to actually cost.
Don't be afraid to look for consultants. Always have a lawyer look over contracts and trust that, find a lawyer that you trust that is a contract lawyer, and have them look over any contract you sign and give you advice on it.
And don't ever be afraid to push back on a contract.
Yeah.
People try to sneak in awful terms, even, or they don't even realize that it's written badly, there's both ignorance and negligence, or
Malfeasance.
Yeah, maliciousness.
Yeah, particularly with contracts, we've learned a lot over the years, and just always talk to a lawyer before you sign anything.
To some degree, we just jumped in the deep end. Really, we made sure that as we were talking about earlier, we did some sort of risk analysis and we're like, seems okay. And then, we both just dived in.
Always be willing to learn. And if you need to learn by jumping in the deep end, then do it that way. But I read a quote, I love being wrong because it means I have the opportunity to learn something.
You're going to be wrong a lot.
Yeah.
But you have to, constantly reevaluate every moment almost. Because, and not to mention the world changes. You didn't know stuff 3 years ago.
Make
about
mistakes.
That contract that you signed that you really shouldn't have signed, for instance.
Yeah. Make mistakes, learn from them, and keep going. And it's okay to change directions. State clearly and do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
And if you can't follow through, then communicate about it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, just talking to people. I mean, like our contract manufacturer, we have a weekly 30-minute meeting with them, and that, I don't know why it took us so long to set that up. And then once we did, so many things just smoothed out that didn't need to be rough, just actually spending the time and talking to people is is just the best way to keep those relationships, healthy. And yeah, not being disingenuous or realizing you're not going to get it done and then getting afraid and then not wanting to admit that. As soon as there's a problem, you got to start talking.
So internally, as I said, we have a really incredible team. And I am 100% confident that nobody here would do anything maliciously. So if something goes wrong here, I'd rather focus on what process failed rather than who is to blame for something. I mean, I'll 100% own it if I screwed something up, and I know that anybody on the team will do the same. If I screwed something up, if somebody else screwed something up, we'll say, I made this mistake. this is what happened. But, what was the process that we have in place that allowed that mistake to happen in the first place? That's what I'd rather address. With external people, you don't always have that confidence. And again, it's often a lot about trust, though. And our biggest, the biggest people we rely on are our contract manufacturer / distributor. And we've worked with the same group for 5 years now. And in that time, I've gotten to the point where I trust that they are honest people. Are they perfect? No. Are we perfect? No. Mistakes happen. I try to always remember, I generally am the point of contact on the business side of things with them. And then we both are on the manufacturing side with them. If there's a problem, we both know that, again, it's not coming from the perspective of them trying to do evil things to us. There's just a communication error. And sometimes it's because it's been over text and it's really easy to talk past each other on text. So then we just get on the phone. Like a lot of communication issues can be solved if you actually just get on the phone, which I know is not cool. And we're just as guilty because we hate being on the phone. But, actually to face-to-face or on the phone talk to somebody will solve a lot of issues.
Yep, definitely. And I would making decisions internally. We really largely go with consensus decisions. We'll talk about it, maybe some factions on two parts that will sort of split out and we'll argue it out, maybe try one or try both. And unless we're really pushed for a deadline, we're not going to move forward until we've all agreed that the compromise is the best possible option here. And being able to do that took many years of sort of figuring out how to argue with each other so that we can, not take any of it personally, but still express, emotionally very strong feelings about design choices, which,
because we all have opinions.
Yeah, yes, we do. But once again, it's just respect the people you're working with and talk it out. And and sometimes it takes you years to finalize the design of a product. Just foreshadowing for what we're releasing next. But and with our manufacturer, they're very good at sort of trade-off compromises. We need to get this done soon, so we need to raise the price or stuff like that. We're working with them. They're really good at you can argue about the money with them, really. It's kind of what I'm getting to, but that actually acts as sort of an aid to finding the compromises between things. We're always willing to talk about price, and just having that variable helps those discussions a lot. We've worked with other people where it was very hard to find the right thing to talk about to motivate them to do what we needed to have done. And it sounds kind of crass, but it's actually really helpful that we can reduce decisions to something like money and actually be able to make a rational choice about something.
Yeah, nobody likes to think about it that way, but when it comes down to getting something made and out the door, it's good to know what your leverage points are.
The responsibility to our employees is actually a really big
consensus, our core
consensus.
Values, I think.
Yeah.
I don't want to ever give up our core values, like consensus and the team being able to have ownership of the things that they do. Our giant commitment to outreach and just making the world a better place in general. all of that. With respect to the products, just having things be really immediate is, we're not a fixed architecture synth that's plug and play, but as much as a modular synth can be plug and play, that is definitely a high watermark for me. It has to be like, put that in, plug it in, patch it up. You got something going on.
So for me personally, as an engineer, and this actually is one of our core values, is that we try to do harder things. And the challenge of the engineering with particular, it has a obviously creative end, but really pushing the limits of what we can do with the hardware we have is something I really enjoy about what I do just day to day. And it makes our products better for the price if you want to kind of reduce it down to that. But also, it just helps me be also engaged in the product development. Because there are just innumerable compromises, particularly on a product that's actually pushing the hardware. It's like there's always nasty trade-offs, and you try to figure out the best possible little option to make it work on that platform. I wouldn't say like there's the important things and not important things. I kind of actually think of this as sort of a engineering term where there's sort of a noise floor, right? It needs to be good enough to be where whatever the negative thing is that you're fighting is below the noise floor of what you're working on. And sometimes you really have to work a long time. I mean, it can be a literal noise, or it can just be sort of like Kris is thinking, an immediacy. Like you don't want to have sort of 3 steps to get to the cool thing, right? You got to reduce the interaction burden.
Latency to cool should be 0.
Latency to cool should be 0, indeed. And like I like to make products that I like too. I mean, there are a lot of creative decisions in our products, particularly a lot of the software products. So even if they're firmware, we can do anything. That knob can do anything, and so we need to find the best sort of option that fits within whatever, if we're making delay, okay, so there's the core part, but then, how can we make each one of these knobs, every little angle of it, as cool as we can?
Everything.
Yeah, everything. I mean, that the early days, it was a hobby, and it was like, oh, I have this cool idea. I'll just solder this thing together, and I'll take it and loan it to my friend who actually now works for us, and have him play with it, and we'll talk about it. And that was pretty much the development product. Was, oh, I have an idea. Let's try it out. Oh, that sucks. Okay, we'll throw that away. And I mean, we still do a fair amount of that. Very simple. Like the best way to have a good idea is to have 1,000 bad ideas. And just sort through and be able to sort through them and call them and keep half-baked ideas for later. Because man, sometimes you can put 2 half ideas together.
We have a lot of Frankenstein things that are.
Yeah. Like these days, we've tried to codify the idea collection process. We actually have a GitHub repository where anyone can just put together a design doc to sort of format. It can get more formal as the product develops, so we can actually have we can put hardware requirements, stuff like that in there. But at its simplest, it could be a couple sentence idea that's not even well thought out. There's actually a whole home for basically one sentence ideas that don't really make a product, but every year I try to go through and just go look at them. And every year there's something that comes back out. I'm like, oh man, that would really fit with this other thing we've been trying to do.
Well, every year we try to do a get together with the entire team from wherever they are in the country. Everybody comes to LA. We call it Synth Daddy, and everybody gets together and we go through all of those ideas and then try to figure out what we want to do for the next year. And so it's a really fun time to go through all of those. But the current process, somebody puts together that design. Every Friday we have a design meeting that is, anybody can come, anybody on the team can come, but they don't have to. in practice, pretty
Every-
much everybody
I
comes.
mean, everyone wants to be a part of the design. So.
Yeah, that's the fun part.
Yeah.
So every Friday we have a design meeting and anybody can present a new idea. And so once we have an idea kind of crystallized, I'll put together the mock-up of a panel and we can start thinking about the layout. And once we agree on that, then I'll put together the schematic and have Marcus work up art. And then when we have the art, it often really informs the
behavior.
workflow a lot better. And it's not uncommon for us to say, oh, you know what, this would be better if we did X, Y, and Z. So we'll change things completely once Marcus does the art. But then once we have the art and we're happy with it, I'll route the PCB, we'll order a prototype, and then Stephen writes the firmware and we try it out. And sometimes it becomes a product and sometimes it does not.
We've gotten a lot better. I mean, I would say our single biggest thing that has improved is our consistency of well, having the first prototype be useful, I guess, is one way to put it, but that also includes like tossing out ideas that aren't great earlier. And you know, like the prototypes we make, I mean, we inevitably will learn something that we'll probably want to make a couple changes to. But like we did 3 prototypes recently this year. And 2 of them were first drafts, and we made a couple changes, and I think we're pretty good with the hardware with those. Whereas the third product, you know, we're on our
66.
Yeah, it's version 66. There have been at least 6 or 7 hardware prototypes made of it.
We haven't built
across-
66 of them.
Right, yeah. There's an internal numbering system, and so sometimes we'll bump a rev even though we haven't built a prototype. But yeah, we have built more than 6 versions of this hardware. But that goes back to, I mean, the very first one I handmade, you know, or early days, it's still a hobby of this. It's just we've learned a lot, made a lot of design choices that were good and bad, and finally came up with something we finally wanted and different.
The other thing that I'll say that we've changed that has really improved things is going back to that core value of consensus. Because we do this now in design meetings, we have everybody weighing in and everybody can look at this layout before we even make the module and say, oh, you know what, what if we put this in the middle? What if we did this? And that leads to just a way better design right off the bat than one person working in isolation does. And so, you know, there's probably a thing as such as too many cooks in the kitchen, as they say, but at this point, we are definitely benefiting from the knowledge and experience of our whole team having eyes on it.
Yeah, it's pretty much impossible to design something, even if, you know, Eurorack modules aren't super complicated, but to do a first draft design that doesn't have a flaw that someone might have noticed if you showed it to them. So yeah, our first drafts our first prototypes are just dramatically better than it used to be, which is good because they're really expensive.
Yeah.
So it's probably the most complicated or complex from an engineering perspective thing we've ever done, by a pretty large margin. It's great. I'm really happy with where the design ended up. I feel like our execution is pretty good as far as we can tell. Obviously, real world testing is
the moment you release a product, and this goes for whatever your product is, once it goes out into the world, it has a lot more eyes on it than it's ever had before. And that's when, you know, you have to really worry.
Yeah, there's always a chance you miss something. It's kind of funny, particularly with this one, because it's completely different. It's gone through like multiple generations of being something almost completely different, but at the same core, like this really the same functionality. I don't know. It's been a very educational journey on that one, for sure.
We've learned a lot.
Yeah, it turns out, you know, very often the only way to learn is to make a mistake, and particularly with some of these,
Or 65 of them.
or 65 of them. And often it's actually the fastest way to learn is to make the mistake, right? Just embrace the fact that you're going to be wrong and try it. And then keep going, that's the only way you can really get some of these tasks done. You can't think about it in isolation for a year. You have to build some prototypes and then realize that you made a bunch of mistakes and fix them and move on.
They end of lifed it.
It was pretty old when we started using it. Really, it wasn't particularly new. And they've officially end of lifed it. It was also one of the during the parts shortages was one of the most difficult parts for us to manage. Not necessarily because we didn't get any, but they would just tell us they'd ship the wrong number. They'd send them early. They'd send them late. Like it was just like a complete random whether we were going to get them or not. Like we had no way to plan for it. But
until then, do you want to talk about the history of the BIA a little bit?
Sure. And actually, it's a great one for talking about design mistakes too. So it is actually the second version of module called the Iteritas, which was one of the very first modules that we released. It was definitely beginner's luck on that one. Geez. And it's a gnarly drum synthesizer. It makes a bunch of crazy sounds that can be like a pretty normal kick or something, or just be completely weird and alien. Definitely on the aggressive sort of sound. And it was just something I threw together on some demo hardware I'd gotten with this processor on it, and it seemed pretty cool. Ended up making some hardware. All of that was hand soldered back in the day. Soldering that CPU also is really hard to do by hand. The first version came out, I think we only made around 500 of them lifetime. It had a lot of just kind of dumb design decisions in it. The knobs were attenuators, not offsets. I don't know why I chose to do that. It was definitely bigger than it needed to be. It didn't actually have a real punchy kick sound, which this is kind of funny because Chris Randall, Audio Damage, after the BIA came out, he was a fan of it. And then they put out the Neuron, I think it was, right after. And he just sent me one for free right after it, just as like sort of like, I took it as a compliment, you did something cool and hey, we're doing something similar. That's cool. So then but it had, I don't know why I never thought to put a pitch envelope in the original, but it's probably the single biggest feature add sound-wise is that there's a pitch envelope on the decay, which is a classic technique for making the front of a kick sound really, really punchy. And so I basically added that to the BIA because Chris Randall reminded me how important that was to punchy drum sounds. So I also sent him a BIA when it came in. And there was another. Oh, there's like hilariously, there's a switch that offsets it and it doesn't offset in octaves. I don't know what the hell I was thinking on the original BI. That's like 2 octaves and a fifth or something. It makes no sense. It really was a hobby project. It turned out to be way cooler than it should have been.
And to be honest, it is what built noise engineering.
Oh, yeah.
It was super popular, and it was the best-selling module we've ever had by a long shot, to answer your question, for sure. It paid for.
It paid for everything. I mean, until Versio, there was nothing close. The second place wasn't particularly close. But the way we build those, we actually look, all of the 10 HP Iteritas modules kind of fit into one category for us.
4 of them.
Yeah, 4 of them.
So we would to make, and this is a sort of other manufacturing sort of trick, as it were, where we have, wherever we can, we make products that share the hardware. So there's a lot less design time, prototyping time, and cost. And then there's the build cost. You can benefit from the economy of scale. So that's been a really useful for, this is the case for the Versio line. It's another line of modules that we have where we have 9 different products on it, but it's all the same hardware. So we just build one hardware and then we put a different panel on it. In the Iteritas, we have 4 different versions of it, and same things, all one hardware, but different panels. I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it's been pretty close to VI, but Iteritas in general has been dropping a little more lately. And everything's
Well,
dropping.
By the time this airs, it'll
proportionally.
have dropped.
Yeah, right. But yeah, and we couldn't do the older hardware that Bacillus uses. Like there is no way I would want for a user to be able to upgrade the hardware. There's no way I would want I can't. There's an ambiguity.
It's complicated enough that there's no way we would want to.
Yeah, I don't want that user experience
Yeah.
for the user, because you have to buy this other thing and run this other software, and with the newer chips that we're using for Versio,
It's so simple.
like you can do it in their web browser. It follows a bunch of industry standards and has USB, and it's really easy to do. So yeah, that was just, those standards kind of all were mature just right before we were doing Versio stuff, so it all worked out really well for us to deliver on that.
We've done a variety of workshops for women and non-binary individuals. A lot of that, we did a few of those over Zoom over the pandemic. A lot of that was before the pandemic, and now that last year we had some weird things happening here internally. So things kind of fell by the wayside while we were dealing with some other things. But we're hoping now that things are open to find new venues that we can do this. In fact, I just had a conversation today with somebody about setting up some new workshops. I think workshops and synth libraries are one of the best way forward because of the access that they allow. Those sorts of programs, and particularly programs where workshops for women and non-binary people that are, I think there's space for workshops for everybody, but also having workshops that are specific to women and non-binary, because there's a little bit more of a opportunity for people to feel free to speak their mind in those sorts of environments. I've seen in the workshops that we've done that are open to anybody, a lot of times people are afraid to open their mouth for fear that they're going to get talked over or laughed at or whatever. So I think one of the best things that we can do is just offer more access, more introductory content, and just make sure that people are not afraid to, well, like we've been saying, not afraid to make mistakes. Like when I teach the workshops, the first thing I say is plug shit in, you won't break it. At that age, I had no idea who I was and where I was going. I thought I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I spent a lot of years pursuing the education I needed to do what I thought I wanted to do. I finished it all and I chucked it all, and now I do this. It's never too late to make a change.
And sometimes you have to, like we're saying, you have to make a mistake to learn, right? That includes making major decisions about your life. And sometimes things are great for a while, and then you're like, I'm tired of this. So yeah, nothing's permanent.
Yeah, don't feel that you have to make a choice that defines you for the rest of your life. I mean, even at our age, our ripe old ages now, I don't feel like any choice we make has to define us for the rest of our life. And it certainly doesn't when you're 18 to 26. Make a choice, live with it for a little bit. You don't like it, make a different choice. It's okay to change your mind.
Yeah. But, and sort of on that, strategies that help you in any situation, learning how to learn, and just that, like Kris says, she spent all those years pursuing a career that she didn't take, but she also spent a lot of that time just learning how to learn, because, it was an academic career. You learn how to do research, you learn how to, read technical literature. There's a lot of sort of secondary skills that are really applicable to what we do now. And so just knowing how to pick up in any situation and figure out what's going on, which is a useful skill, as it turns out. My version of that was like my undergraduate degree is a math degree, because I also had no idea what the hell I wanted to do with my life. And that just
We
seemed,
both dropped out of college.
yeah. And then came back later. Yep. But it was the only degree that was challenging, because I can't do things that are boring. It just doesn't work for me. But then it also was open-ended, because I didn't have to make any decisions about what I wanted to do, because it's applicable to you could go out of math into any sort of technical field. So including music, as it turns out. So yeah, I guess those are our words of advice.